everything, you should be able to kind of say, okay, I have a little bit more knowledge on this. So maybe we need to have a look at that estimate again, or maybe it's a discovery requirement, we need to go back and have a look on that. And I think the one thing the dev team will be really happy to hear, it is just an estimate. We're not going to be holding them to it. It's just an indication of how much effort is required for that piece of thing. At least that's how I feel about estimation.
I think that's spot on. I can't believe we almost forgot to record, despite writing it massively there. That was almost a massive failure. But yeah, I think you're right. An estimate, it is what it is. And like I said, as we know more, we become more accurate. I think that's a lot of forgotten. A lot of times we're asked what's an estimate on day one, and you have that estimate for the rest of a project, which is really difficult and potentially dangerous, I think, as well, in terms of what we're trying to achieve, what we're setting out to do.
But I think you have to kind of link it always back to the client, and the two questions that they're always going to be asking you, no matter how much you tell them that it's just an estimate, don't hold us to it. All they really want to know is how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take, and they're really important questions. You don't really know what's going on in their own internal kind of makeup. They might have certain deadlines, they might have certain initiatives, and of course they're going to want to fit in amongst all of those. So they're very valid questions. It's just about how we best answer them.
Yeah, I think those questions come from I mean, in the consulting world, they come from some of our customers. In perm world, they come from the business, and you know, the ideas sponsors, the sponsors are kind of agreeing to spend the money because this is what they want to know. Are they going to get a good return on their investment? And this kind of leads on to why estimation is so important. For those big questions, how long is it going to take? What's it going to cost me? They kind of go on over project start decisions. Are we going to do this or not? Because you know, in reality, we're talking about big bits of money here, and we need to know whether the money we're going to invest is going to give us a good return on investment. Is it going to solve a problem that's going to really help us move the product forward? Is it going to generate enough revenue to make it worth it? You know,
it's just drumming down that value aspect of things. All people want to see is the value at the end of it, and it is always linked to those two questions.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think you think about like the film industry, they're never going to make a film that's not going to get more money that's going to generate, and that's what we're doing, isn't it? We need to be doing projects that are going to generate or enough value to be worth doing. And that kind of leads into planning a roadmap. So estimation is kind of key for planning of roadmaps, both for those early discovery stages and later on. But when are we going to see value? When are we going to deliver value? When are we going to actually get something out of this? And without an estimate, it's kind of just at some point, bear with us, you know, and that can be great, but it really, really frustrating for customers and clients and businesses.
It's about the vision, I think, more than anything. You want to paint like a picture of where it's going. It's not just about the value, but when they're going to get that value, when can they see it all come together and paint that picture. And
also, people have got different priorities, you know. So if they've got a really clear roadmap, well, they need to ask you when the other things come, if they can see when it is and when it's linked as well. And that's kind of that prioritization of work. If you've got something with a small estimate and a big value, that's kind of then let's do that one first, let's get it out of the way, let's get it done. You know, it's a great proposition to bring loads of value for little effort. Something that's massive with very little value might slip to the bottom of the roadmap and may never get done because where's the value? And that's kind of in the budget control area as well. You know, we need to know how much we're going to spend, when we're going to spend it, and you know those two big questions, they all centered around that cost. I think from a consultancy point of view, but even from like a development team point of view, in a big company, there's a customer relationship. There could be senior stakeholders, there could be your actual customers, there could be the people on the end of the, you know, actually using the product at the end of it. Because those the customer relationship is so important. You know, gains if you get pushed back and back and back and back because the estimates obviously haven't been quite there and they haven't encompassed everything. Really frustrate a fan base of you know, waiting for something, gagging for something to be released, and it's really almost a negative experience. And when it finally gets here 2 years late, you're already kind of down below that excitement where you were before.
Things like transparency. I think like it really adds into transparency where you can give them kind of an estimate of when things are going to be dropping. They can see how kind of everything's going to come together. It prompts those conversations, those discussions, just brings everybody together and on the same topic as well.
Yeah, I think there's maybe the other element relationship with other teams and things. If you're integrating with other products or integrating with other teams, you want to line them up, don't you, to be kind of ready when you are. And without estimation, you've got no idea what to do, and it can really difficult.
Shoot in the dark.
Shoot in the dark, exactly. Yeah. And the last one we've got on here is asking for help. You know, as a group, to have about estimating with your team. If the team thinks it's a small task that should take a couple of days, and I'm 2-3 days in, and I'm really struggling with this bit of work, maybe a prompt for me to say, hey, I need some help here. You guys thought it's a really small, I'm struggling. Someone else knows that I don't. Can you please get involved and give me a hand? So the kind of title of the thought was why is time the enemy of estimation, and why is time horrible? And I think time has a place in estimation. There's early kind of confidential discovery. It has to, right? Because we've got no previous data to go off. And those kind of conversations can be, is it 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, really, really big tasks. But what we kind of wanted to do there is we want to commit to solving a problem within the time frame and not commit to a really fixed scope or a fixed solution. But if you think about time and using time to estimate, time is so emotional. Everyone's attached to time. Everyone knows what time is, and it's really, really fixed. So if you give a ticket a 5-day estimate and you work an 8-hour work day, then the 5-day estimate is 5 days times 8 hours, 40 hours. It's a 40-hour work week on a 40-hour estimate. That means if you pick a ticket up Monday morning, somebody can say, well, why isn't it finished Friday evening? Because it's a 5-day ticket. You estimate it's 5 days. That's how long you told me it's going to take. So why is it not done? Why is it not complete? And I think that's really, really dangerous, because then what you end up doing is, I've seen people go down the route of saying, well, okay, well, there's stand-up every day, so I need to create a stand-up ticket to log 2.5 hours per week. And we had a retro, so I allowed an hour to the retro ticket to try and justify why that ticket wasn't done in that time box.
I think also, we want to encourage discussion, not discourage it. If people feel like, wait a second, you spent every single moment working on this particular ticket or feature, then we're not trying to get that trust within your team. And I think one thing that we're always trying to do is to build trust within the teams that we're working on, so they can make sure they're actually building the best product and escalating where they might have issues. And that's the only way we're actually going to be building forward and building solid teams who can build great products. Yeah,
exactly. I think with using time as an estimate, what you seem to do is you see people building buffers in. I'll have a couple of days, I've got to wait for answers here and there, and you start to build and inflate this time with no real thought. It's just I don't know, this will take 5 days, so I'll call this up. And there's no real thinking behind or thought behind it. It's just a guess, which I suppose is what estimation is, isn't it? Really, but it's just inflated kind of for the sake of it. And it doesn't necessarily take into account that we're not actually working on this thing for 8 hours every single day. It might be an hour today, 3 hours tomorrow. As we get feedback, as we're waiting for things, as we're waiting for builds to arrive and test it to come back and customer feedback and all these other things.
I want to make a cup of tea.
Yeah, you want to make a cup of tea. Yeah, you're not going to be there for 8 hours a day, are you? Do you play your estimate for making a cup of tea?
Yeah, I think definitely when I've been in teams where they've done time estimates, I've seen them saying, but what about this? What about if this happens? What about if that happens? And you end up having these estimating times that are taking forever for a ticket that's actually quite small. And you've got a big team in the room of 5-6 developers trying to argue over, oh, I think that is a 2-day task. I think that's a 1-day task. You're wasting time in that meeting actually trying to decide and argue over those things that slightly, and they're not useful anyway.
Yeah, I think that's true. And to be honest, I think the most dangerous thing about time is, like we said, with this kind of real basic calculation kind of here, is that this ticket will start on Monday morning, it should be finished Friday evening. Somebody knows that, the business knows that, the people above have seen the time and they're now fixed on time, and somebody got somebody working till midnight on Thursday thinking, God, this has got to be finished tomorrow, that's going to be finished tomorrow, I said it will finish tomorrow, I've got to work. And that kind of it's just not good for the team, nor is it mental health of the team. They're just fatigue and their levels going to drop off. It's just no good. I think that's a lesson. Time's no good.
Yeah.
Which is fine to say, but what do you do about it? How do you estimate if you're not using time?
And that's kind of what we're going to try and address here. And I think we have to try and think about what we're trying to achieve from an estimate. And I think for me with the team, I want to try and make sure that I'm thinking about the effort of the whole end-to-end flow. Especially when you might have teams that are made up of different people, maybe a developer and a tester, trying to get them to think about each other is really important, because we can think about how we can best support it. So if you've got a ticket to I don't know, build a database, it's actually not just building the database and schemas. How can we actually go through to make sure that it's working as we expect? It's just as important to understand even the deploying side of things. We want to do a continuous deployment. How much effort is required to deploy that as well? I think a really important thing is only also estimating on what we actually know. So many times we see tickets come into refinement, and there might be so many outstanding questions that developers seem really, really uncomfortable to put any kind of estimate time or not time on it. And what we should be saying as facilitators of those meetings is, there's obviously so many unanswered questions on this. We need to do more work on this before bringing it in front of you. whether that means breaking it down, doing spikes. We need to be facilitating it to make sure the estimate that we are going to give is going to be correct.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes down to when we are comfortable to give an estimate, we're still only estimating what we know right now. You don't know what kind of state the code is going to be, and you don't know what's going to happen next week. You know, so all you can do is estimate on the knowledge you've got at that time, and you can't just predict what's going to happen. And that's why holding people to those estimates of time is really, really dangerous, really risky, because you don't know what's going to actually happen.
Yeah, and I think I've got a prime example of that. Like when you're integrating with third-party suppliers, we've done it before where maybe they've had issues, and every time we picked up a ticket on it, we've always faced an issue, different one. And they're saying, well, we have to predict for those issues to come up to. I'm like, well, how can we predict for that? We don't have that information. We need to kind of come up with ways of kind of dealing with those situations. The other one is around it kind of being a team sport. If we've got multiple people working on tickets, they should be involved in estimating it. It seems simple when you say it out loud, but it's so easy to be kind of put in silos when you've got fast deadlines or high pressures on teams. But taking that time out to get everybody in the room really, really helps. And it's more about the discussion. The estimate is, in my opinion, like an added extra. The most important thing, the most valuable thing when you're talking about these is the discussion.
Yeah, I think we've all been there when and I'll be guilty of, I suppose, Tab and I have is saying, right, we need to get this done quickly. Let's get our 10 leads to go bang, 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 whack some estimates on. And they whack the estimates on, and they've got all that knowledge, all that experience. They know exactly what to do. So naturally, their estimates are smaller than everyone else's. And then you think, oh God, their estimates will be smaller. What about the juniors, the team members of the team? Let's inflate the estimates. And again, it's just completely random. What's the point in doing it? Well, yeah, why do we even bother doing it if it's going to be so guessworky?
Exactly. We want to make sure if we are going to give an estimate, as you said, it's of value. And another thing, if we have got people arguing over it, if we're talking about time, something that has a lot of emotion against it, it's kind of hard to say, let's just take the average, because people are going to do that. I'm held to that. I don't want to give an average. I know it's going to be 2 days, and I know you're saying it's 1 day. But if we can try and take a little bit of the emotion out of it and keep that conversation about the kind of discussion about what's going on, we can actually just take the average, because the most important thing is actually how we got to that decision. Yeah,
I think so. I think it's one of those things where you don't want to argue over, is it 1 day, is it 1.5 days? Because that's such a small amount of time, like I think you sometimes have. You spend so much time having an argument, you've lost half a day. You know, with 8 people in the room, you've suddenly lost 4 hours very quickly. So you already lost that time. So it's not worth it. But also, it's really important to reflect on those different sizes. Because if I say it's going to be a small, and you say to me extra large, one of us probably knows something the other doesn't. You might have worked in that area of the code and say it's so complicated, it's such a mess, it's so tangled, it's really, really difficult. Or I might know a really easy way to do it. You know, if there's a really simple way around the problem and that you won't come across. So it's important not just go, okay, well, we'll call it a large. That conversation does really facilitate and gets us moving. However, we don't want to spend hours on it. We don't want to really, really linger.
And I think that kind of really naturally links on to what we're going here to talk about, more around relative estimations and potentially even no estimations.
Cool. So story points and teacher sizes, a quick intro to them. I'm sure people have heard about them, come across them, but we just want to kind of set the scene, I suppose. It's a really quick, simple method of estimation. Stories are given teacher sizes, so it's like extra small, medium, large, extra large, XXL. You keep going. You probably don't want too many, because then you're getting into that really fine grain of being really small. Or they give stories a story point value. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. That's the kind of Fibonacci sequence of they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because as they get bigger, there's probably more unknowns. We know less about them, so it's probably going to take a bit longer, because we can only estimate what we know. Shirts and story points don't equate to time. It's really important we don't let them ever equate to time. They say an extra small is half a day, and a small is a day, and a medium is 3 days. That happens all the time. Again, I've definitely been guilty of that myself, and then doing it because it's easy to understand time. But the whole point of teacher sizes and story points is taking those individual tickets away from the developers can't see them, so they're not worrying, they're not fretting over, I need to finish it by Friday afternoon. The business aren't seeing them, so they're thinking that's going to be done by Friday. It takes it away, doesn't it? And
I think there's also an element of the journey that you have to take anybody on with this one, because there is still, like we were going back to those initial questions, those questions they want answered. So we still need to come up with tools and ways to give people answers to the question without necessarily getting them to look at such a fine-grained piece of sand in the big world of a project. How can we kind of give them those answers effectively?
Yeah, I think so. So these are 2 great ways, story points and teacher sizes, to step the team, especially, and the business running out at that time. estimate. But like kind of have such on the start, there are still two key questions. What's it going to cost? How long it's going to take? And from a delivery perspective, that's not something we can just ignore. We can't just not give that kind of information.
Can't say to my client, I don't actually know how long it's going to take, and
exactly.
it's going to cost what it costs. They're going to look at me like I'm crazy.
It'd be freedom there, wouldn't it? Yeah. So we can use story point teach sizes to relative estimate to estimate relatively.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to use a Toby special, which is an analogy, to try and understand kind of why we do this. And we're trying to estimate on not only the size of that item, but actually how complex it is, because complexity adds in an element of size. If we're working on something completely new, we don't have that knowledge. There's going to be an element of upskilling, looking into it. We don't have that kind of prior knowledge to bring into that estimating session. So you might want to make it a slightly larger estimate because of that. So let's go for like a very simple example. If I was brushing my teeth, I could estimate that with the knowledge of doing it many times before, that's quite a small task. And by kind of thinking, okay, so cleaning my bike compared to cleaning my teeth, maybe that's a medium. If I'm going to kind of do it relatively, it's definitely more effort than brushing my teeth, but there's definitely things that are probably harder or more complex to do. Or we can also do it on kind of like other effort ideas. So if I was brushing my daughter's teeth, if I knew that brushing my teeth is small, then probably brushing my daughter's teeth is going to be a small too. They're quite similar. Or maybe cleaning the car. Cleaning my bike was a medium, then cleaning my car is definitely going to be hard, and that's especially doing all the inside and getting rid of all the crumbs. Yeah,
it's bigger, right? It's bigger. However, I did write this analogy before my daughter had teeth. And I've been since informed that brushing her teeth will not be the same length of time as brushing my teeth because she bites. And she grabs the toothbrush. But yeah, it's true, isn't it? You know that cleaning your bike is bigger than brushing your teeth because they're the same motions. You get the brush out, you're brushing them, using toothpaste or soap or whatever. But cleaning your bike is definitely bigger than brushing your teeth. We know that brushing someone else's teeth would probably be about the same size as my teeth. It's going to be difference here and there, but it's about the same size, and that cleaning their car is definitely bigger than brushing teeth, and it's definitely bigger than bike. So that's how we can use estimation relatively, because we're starting to base it off actual things. We're starting to base it off facts. We behind the scenes, especially at delivery capacity, we know how long that cleaning the bike actually took. So when somebody says that cleaning the car is larger than that, you've already kind of narrowed down how long that kind of thing we think that's going to take. It's going to be bigger than the completed task of cleaning a bike, or it could be smaller than that task as well. So what does that give us? Because we still haven't really got anything at the back of that. We've relatively estimated things, but we've not got anywhere. But it allows us to get velocity, and we need a bit of time to build up a velocity. But basically, what velocity does, it allows us to turn estimates into time. Those relative estimates that teach us historic content don't equate to time. It allows us behind the scenes to turn into time to be able to report on things, because it is important. We need to know answer specific questions. Are we on track? What's it going to cost? Velocity does need to be understood over a period of time. And if you have a 2-week sprint like after your first sprint, you're probably not really going to have a very good velocity. It's going to be a bit of a.
Still getting used to everything.
You're still getting used to it. It's still going to be a bit of a fake. 2, 3, 4 sprints in, that velocity really become more accurate, become a lot more stable. We're going to know how many story points we're delivering per sprint. And what you can do in the background, you can try and figure out teacher sizes, how many teacher sizes we're delivering per sprint. You can also, behind the scenes, if your team with like estimated story in teacher sizes, is just put some values on them behind the scenes. So you kind of you kind of know how many points you're delivering per sprint, and that starts to allow you to see how many, if you've got 100 story points in your backlog, we're delivering on average 20 story points every sprint. It gives you a really great understanding. Okay, that's probably 5 sprints more work. And as more work starts to come in, you start to see how your backlog's flexing and how your time's flexing, how your budget's flexing. Without the team having to think about time, and without the client having to, and the customer having to see, well, this ticket's 5 days, scrap it. I don't want that one, it's too big or whatever. It kind of really extracts that away of time.
Yeah, I think the only other thing to mention about velocity, it does move. I think it is an ebb and flow, especially obviously in your ideal project, you have the same team working all the time. In reality, that's hardly ever the case. You have people rolling on and off as you need them, or as other projects need them as well. So I think we need to also understand that just because we're giving them an average, that is just an average, in the same way an estimate is just an estimate. and it will kind of ebb and flow as things happen within your team.
Yeah, definitely. Velocity will go up and then go down. The longer we be doing it, the more accurate that velocity is going to be for us, and the more the more it allows us to really predict what's going on. And it's a really it is a great metric. And like I said, it takes away from the team having no worry about time. But also what it does is it allows us to accurately estimate tickets based on data, but also it accounts for that padding we were doing, the time. Time we were saying it's 5 days, let's call it 7 for a bit padding. Velocity's taking that into account for us. A ticket starts on one day, it finishes 10 days later. There might have only been 2 days worth of work on that ticket.
It just takes into account like the meetings. Like most people will have a refinement session, because they'll be having their stand-ups or just general talking. Instead of having to be like, okay, spent 10 minutes here and 5 minutes there, you can just completely abstract it. And I think everybody's always a fan of that.
Yeah, exactly. And so velocity is really great to turn into throughput. Is this you? Is this me? Is this me? Okay, cool. I'm trying to throw you under the bus. So velocity can definitely then be turned into throughput. And throughput is something we can start to do when we've really started to abstract away from that time, and we basically just know how many work items are completed in a unit of time. So once we've got a really good understanding of what our kind of average is, you can almost start to step away from estimation a little bit entirely. We know that on average we complete 10 tickets every single 2 sprints. Some sprints we might complete 2 extra large tickets, but the next sprint we might complete 18 small tickets. It's they're all going to kind of average out eventually to 10 per sprint or whatever. And it allows us to really start to almost just remove estimation. As long as our team are breaking down our stories in a really, in a relatively consistent way. So a large, extra large is supposed to be large, and they're always breaking them down in that consistent manner. If you can get to a point of really understanding a velocity, and from there understanding a throughput, you can almost take estimation off the table, and it's no longer a thing. Especially if that team is staying together, they're a product team, so they're staying together for new problems. They're going to keep iterating on a product and solve stuff. When you have that open conversation, how long it's going to take you at the start, if you start to break that new requirement down into stories, you don't need to estimate. You say, well, we'll split into 50 stories, we deliver 10 stories every sprint, it's going to take 5 sprints. And you can take it all off the table, but you're still doing the data-driven. It's not just a guess.
I think that's the key point, isn't it? It's around it being data-driven, not emotion-driven. Because if we have the data behind it, then it's going to be more accurate, because as kind of a delivery lead or somebody who's working with the team, especially if you're using different kind of software tools that actually record it for you, it makes it even more simple in kind of how we work as teams to look back and actually be able to give a better kind of view of what we've done before and how we can take that forward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I said, it's data driven, so the data's there. We can show people when people are doubting, why are you estimating? Or because here are the data we've got, and look, it's accurate, and
prove it out.
Yeah, a lot of the people are maybe doubting things to see things a little bit more. So talk about cycle time.
Yeah, so cycle time is very much kind of going off kind of what you said. The same kind of premise is trying to go towards more of that data-driven kind of way of thinking. And cycle time thinks about a task for a team and how long that actually takes to actually get done. So from the point it's picked up to the point it's deployed, how long is that taken? And I think the good thing about this is you can then, if you have a new ask from a client, it's like, oh, I want you to go and build this particular feature. And you have to think, wait a second, we did something really similar to that about 2 months ago. You can go back and actually have a look at the cycle time for that particular item and give an even more kind of data-driven estimate on that one, basing on both your average cycle time as well as kind of a very specific one as well. And it just going towards no estimates. And I think that's something that we should always keep in our minds. If we can get to that point, that means that our teams are quite strong. But sometimes it isn't always the case. You can't do it. But if we can have it, if we can get there, I think it's quite an exciting thought.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's exciting because the amount of time we spend estimating is pretty large. You know, might have a half a day kind of requirements every sprint and plus estimating sessions and all that kind of stuff. And they're there for the reason, you know, because we have to answer those 2 big questions, and we gave those reasons, you know, at the start of the talk. But if we can move away from that and not have to estimate, but still get all the really great things that estimation gives us because the data is behind the scenes and it's working, that's a fantastic place to be, isn't it? We're saving time, but still getting all the great outputs and being able to provide the data behind it, which is kind of really, really fantastic.
And I can definitely say that my dev team would love it as well. I think that's the one thing that devs sometimes would prefer not to. So
yeah, I think so. I think I'd prefer not to have to do it as well, to be honest.
I think all of what we've spoken about kind of all links back into the roadmaps, which is something that you spoke about earlier. Because realistically, if we have a prioritized backlog and we understand kind of what is it becoming next, what's the priorities of both business and kind of technically where things should be coming, and we have things like cycle time, velocity, throughput, we can actually really accurately paint that vision of where we can go in a certain amount of time and actually by what point, what features can you get. And I think if we keep it like that as a living artifact that we're constantly looking at and constantly refining based on the data that we have, we can be more transparent with our clients and give them the best value and show them where their value is coming from.
I think so. I think from a delivery point of view, it gives you that almost that instant knowledge of how long something's going to take. If you've got a backlog of 100 items and we know exactly how many tickets we get through in the sprint, like I said, we can kind of quickly just say it's going to take us 5 sprints or however long it's going to take. And as that backlog increases or decreases, you can really quickly get an idea of how that time frame is changing, especially if you're on maybe a tight deadline or a tight budget, when we need to know where we are and what, in a backlog somewhere, there's almost like a cutoff, isn't there? We can deliver this and not this because of the time. And you can almost see that line go up and down in real time. We can get away from this estimation, because otherwise you've got to get the team to fully estimate every item in the backlog, and that's just such a big task, especially if it's things that you might never get to because they're down the priority list.
And you're taking people away from actually doing things, especially when you're in quite like I imagine in COVID, that's probably like when you have all these really, really fast-paced projects that came up. The thing that you want to do is have your developers developing. That's all we ever want to do, is get people doing what they're doing best. So if we can do anything just to abstract that or take that away, we can make sure we're actually getting the best out of our teams.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you very much. That kind of brings us to the end of the time at the end of information talk. And hopefully we've kind of, I suppose, got the original message across of why time is universally used, but actually a pretty poor metric for estimation. And hopefully kind of talk through some of the techniques and things you can do to switch away from them. And it's one of these things where I think a lot of people know about these things, a lot of people understand what they are, but it's actually getting that mentality change, that culture change, and that higher business buy-in that actually move the data-driven. Yeah, it's a journey, but moving the data-driven things is great. And you can see it, you can understand it, you know why it's happening, and think about how much time you get back from removing estimation. You've got an estimation session once a week with 8 people in. That's a full day we're losing in development time every single week from these sessions. So we can start to show the amount of time and amount of extra value we're delivering by just knowing the metrics.
Yeah, and I think also if you always link it back to the generic, normally the 2 questions that a client's asking, if you can then say, I can still give you that with this new way I'm proposing, you kind of make sure you try and work out, well, what value are you getting out of estimates anyway? What value are you trying to get out of estimates? And actually, as long as you go with that kind of mentality forward, it's easier to kind of show them how actually you can go a different way and still get that same value and get those 2 main questions that they have answered.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We've got plenty of time, I think, actually. If anyone's got any questions or anything they want to ask, please do just put it in the chat or unmute and ask us now. Or this talk will be available via the Leeds Digital socials later on, LinkedIn especially, I think, and Tabs and I are on there to ask any questions as well.
Yeah.
Pop up afterwards. One thing we do have to plug, which was supposed to be a slide I put in the presentation but I forgot, was Boycott Your Bed, which is something Leeds Digital supporting this year, as are a lot of other consultancies and other companies in Leeds. Everyone's spending a kind of a night in Millennium Square to help raise money for children who are suffering from homelessness and try and support them. And even though that one night goes nowhere near the kind of discomfort those kind of families feel, it's hopefully somewhere to raise a bit of money for charity. Ben, how to get approaching subject with middle and senior management? It's a great question, and it's one of those difficult ones. That, how do we get away from this time thing? And sometimes it's a losing battle, because they know what time is. Time is, it's there, they can see it. One of the best ways I've seen to do it is go along with actual facts, actual information. If you can start popping in some story points behind the scenes, if your team starts to estimate something as 3 days, call it medium. If they call it 5 days, call it advanced. Start to put that kind of stuff in behind the scenes, it's not to work out some of those metrics. they'll probably come out more accurate than the actual estimates will, because you're taking into account that full cycle time, that full throughput, the full velocity. And you can say, actually, if we'd have used story points or t-shirt sizes, I'd have given you a 3-week estimate. In time, we gave you a 2-week estimate. It took 3 weeks. We would have been able to give you a much more accurate estimate, a data-driven estimate based on story points or t-shirt sizes than we did in time. So, okay, great, the time was less, it's a shorter estimate, but it was wrong. So what's the point in it? You know, there's no point in estimates if they're incorrect.
And all we ever want is to be predicting the best. Like you said, there's no point in having a low value or a team being scared to give a true value because it's a high number. So if we can try and, like I said, in parallel, show the data. If we're talking about data-driven estimates, why don't we go with data for the data-driven estimates? And you can do things in the background, especially when you're using tools, to start kind of showing those bits in the background, and then it becomes an easier sell because you can say, oh look, I have already done this.
Yeah, I think so. Tab, we talked about transparency at one point, and you know, it's easy for people to say, well, you're just hiding behind t-shirt sizes because they don't give me anything, and that's absolutely not the case. What that kind of estimation, like relative estimation, the velocity, throughput, cycle time, all that kind of stuff gives us is actually more transparency, of actual proper understanding of when it's going to be delivered, rather than just this guessing, and I better say 2 days because I know they need it in 2 days. But actually, in 2 days it won't be ready, and I've started now, so I've got to finish it. So
yeah, I think also if you can start coming up with data about how long your team are taking to estimate things. I know when I was in a time estimate kind of scenario, it was a long time. Our refinements were going over time because people were arguing over a day, half a day. And if you can go with those kind of little bits of data as well, it will help just build up a nice vision of actually where we're trying to go. Any?
Cool.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben.
Well, if there's no more questions, then thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy days, busy Fridays, to come and spend time with us. Like I said, if any questions pop up afterwards, please do, pop them on LinkedIn to us or whatever, and we'll try and have a chat through them. And yes, thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of LDF next week.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.